The Meridian Agricultural Holdings agronomist looked at the notebook for about 4 seconds. He had a name, Keith Stover, licensed in Iowa, 7 years with the firm. And he had a surveyor behind him and a drainage plan that a team in Des Moines had spent 6 weeks on. He had a company truck on the county road and a tile installation schedule and $24, $3 million of investors' money already committed. He looked at the calculation in the spiral-bound notebook that a 16-year-old was holding out across the fence wire, worked out in blue ballpoint, in the handwriting of a man who had been dead for 22 months, and he looked at the boy holding it. Then he leaned forward over the top wire. Then he smiled. This is not the story of the smile. It is the story of what came after it. This is the kind of story my grandfather would have told, the kind where someone writes something down in a notebook 30 years before anyone needs it, and the right person finds it just in time. If your grandfather told stories like that, this channel is for you. Subscribe before we go further. Hardin County, Iowa sits near the geographic center of the state, which is to say it sits near the center of some of the most heavily tiled farmland on Earth. The land is black and nearly flat and extraordinarily productive, and the reason it can be farmed at all is that almost every acre of it has perforated pipe running 3 to 4 feet underground, installed over 100 years of continuous drainage work, carrying water by gravity off the nearly impermeable subsoil that would otherwise keep the fields wet through May. The tile systems run like a circulatory system beneath every farm in the county, connecting through outlet structures to drainage ditches that carry water eventually to the Iowa River. Most people driving through Hardin County in October never think about this. The tile is invisible. It is also everything. The Durbin farm occupied 240 acres in the southwest corner of the county, on ground the family had worked since 1931. Dan Durbin, 47, ran it with his son Cale, who had been in the fields with his father and grandfather since he was old enough to follow without getting in the way. The farmhouse was white with a green metal roof. The office was off the kitchen. The shelves in that office held 4 decades of USTA reports, 3 generations of crop records, and 14 spiral-bound notebooks that had belonged to Cale's grandfather, Walter Durbin, who had died in January of 2020 at 85. Walter had not left much money. He had left the notebooks. The 3,000 acres north of the Durbin farm sold in September of 2021. The buyer was Meridian Agricultural Holdings, LLC, a St. Louis-based agricultural investment group that had acquired approximately 47,000 acres of Iowa and Illinois farmland over the preceding 7 years. Meridian did not farm the land itself. It hired farm managers and contracted tile crews and agronomists and reported to its investors quarterly. It had paid $8,100 per acre, $3 million for the full parcel. It was, by any standard, a serious purchase. The closing attorneys, the title search, the environmental study, the drainage assessment, all of it was thorough. Nobody from Meridian knocked on the Durbin farmhouse door. Meridian announced a drainage renovation project on the 3,000 acres in October of 2021. The existing tile was a deteriorated mix of clay and early plastic pipe installed between 1958 and 1978, running at a fraction of its original capacity. The renovation plan called for new 4-inch adze high-density polyethylene tile, installed at modern density and depth across the full property. Standard practice. Sound agronomy. The project was to begin after fall harvest and finish before spring planting. Nobody at Meridian looked up the Hardin County Drainage District records before filing the tile plan. Hardin County Drainage District Number 14 had been established in 1921 to manage the drainage outlet for the northeast quadrant of the county, including the 3,000 acres Meridian had just purchased. The district maintained the main drainage ditch and the outlet structures connecting each member property's tile to the county drainage corridor. Every parcel in the district was a member. Every member paid annual assessments that went back to 1921, recorded in ledgers at the county courthouse in Eldora. The outlet structure at the southwest corner of Meridian's property, the concrete headwall and corrugated metal pipe that passed the district's water into the ditch running along the Durbin Farm's north fence line, was a structure that Walter Durbin had helped design and size in 1961. He had written the calculation down. Cale knew the notebook. The drainage district office was in Eldora, 11 miles south on Highway 65. Cale drove there on a Tuesday in late October, before the Meridian tile crew had started any work. The district's administrator, a careful man named Del Swartz, who had run the office for 19 years, pulled the district 14 records without comment and let Cale sit at the table with them. The records went back to the original 1921 establishment. Walter Durbin's name appeared on board minutes from 1974 through 2001. 27 years of quarterly meetings, drainage assessments, tile disputes, outlet maintenance decisions. The 1961 outlet redesign was in the file. An engineering firm had done the original calculations. The design specified a headwall and corrugated steel pipe size to handle 4 cubic feet per second, the peak flow volume for the upstream district acreage under the tile density that existed in 1961. A note in the file, in someone else's handwriting, recorded that the calculation assumed no substantial increase in upstream tile density. Cale photographed the file. He drove home. He got the 5th notebook off the office shelf, the one covering 1960 through 1967, and found the pages where Walter had written his own version of the calculation, independent of the engineering firm, run in parallel to verify the numbers. Walter had arrived at the same outlet capacity, 4 cubic feet per second. He had noted the same design assumption. In the margin, in pencil, he had written, "If they ever retile the north section at modern density, this number changes. Someone should run it again." That margin note was 60 years old. Walter Durbin had come to farming the way certain men come to it, not because there was no other option, though there wasn't much, but because the land was where he could think, and the problems it presented were problems he was built for. He had grown up on the farm his father bought in 1931, taken it over in 1964 at 29, and worked it with a kind of quiet thoroughness that tends to look like stubbornness to people who don't understand it, and like wisdom to people who do. He had joined the Hardin County Drainage District Board in 1974 because a neighbor had asked, and because he had found, at the first meeting, that he understood the hydrology of the local township better than most of the men in the room, and that this was something a person could be useful about. He stayed on the board for 27 years. He attended every quarterly meeting. He read everything the engineering firm submitted and ran the calculations himself afterward in the notebooks to verify them. He was not suspicious of the engineers. He just wanted to know whether they were right. He had a habit of taking Cale through systems. Not lecturing. Walter Durbin did not lecture, but walking, pointing, asking the occasional question that had an answer Cale was expected to find himself. The drainage system was a system Walter had spent 3 decades thinking about, and he walked Cale through it the way he walked him through anything he believed the farm required understanding of, once, thoroughly, without repetition, trusting that the information would hold. Cale had grown up knowing where the main tile ran under the east field, and where it intersected the county drain, and what the tile depth was in the low corner by the north fence, and why it mattered. This was not unusual knowledge for a farm kid. What was unusual was the precision of it, the specific numbers, the reasoning behind each one, the understanding that a drainage system was not passive infrastructure, but a set of hydraulic decisions made by specific people at specific times and recorded, if you knew where to look, in notebooks and county files that were still there if anyone thought to read them. He had walked Cale out to the outlet structure on a July afternoon in 2017, when Cale was 12, and the two of them had no particular reason to be at the north fence, except that Walter liked to walk the fence in July and liked Cale's company. He had shown him the concrete headwall and the rusted flap gate and the corrugated steel pipe and explained what they were for and what they could handle. He said the number the way he said most numbers, plainly, with no special weight on it, as though it were simply a fact of the landscape that Cale should know the way he knew where the tile outlets were and which fields tended to pond. He said 4 cubic feet per second. He said if the upstream parcels ever went to modern tile density, someone would want to run the calculation again before they installed anything. Cale had been 12. He had filed the information in the place where things stay when a person you trust tells them to you in a quiet voice. He was 16 when he needed it. The technical fact at the center of the problem was a question about flow rates. Tile drainage moves water by gravity through perforated underground pipe to an outlet structure. The speed and volume it can move depend on pipe diameter, tile depth, spacing, and slope. The outlet structure is the narrowest point in the system. If the tile upstream generates more water than the outlet can pass, the system backs up, the tile fills, the soil saturates. The field floods from below rather than from above. You can have 3 inches of rain on 2 inches of standing groundwater and watch a planted field disappear under water that has nowhere to go. Adds 4-inch high-density polyethylene tile installed at the density and depth in Meridian's plan, 30-inch depth, 60-foot spacing across 3,000 acres, would produce a peak discharge in a wet spring on saturated ground of approximately 1 cubic feet per second. The outlet capacity was 4. The difference was 7 cubic feet per second. In a dry spring it might not matter. The system might never approach peak and the margin would stay invisible. In a wet spring, 2 or 3 inches of rain on already saturated ground in early April, the system would run at peak. The outlet would be inadequate. The tile would back up across 3,000 acres, and the corn would go under. Cale wrote the calculation on a single page. He drove to the Meridian field office in Ackley and asked to speak to whoever managed the tile project. The office gave him a number. He called the number, and Keith Stover, Meridian's agronomist out of Des Moines, agreed to come to the outlet site the following Tuesday. Lyle Bauer was running a cover crop pass on his field to the west that Tuesday morning, a John Deere 8R on a cedar working toward the road. He saw Meridian's truck pull up on the county road and Cale's truck behind it, and he slowed the pass deliberately. Because in 41 years of watching that corner of Hardin County he had found that when a company truck and a Durbin ended up at the same fence line, something worth paying attention to was about to happen. He made a slow pass east and did not look directly. Keith Stover and the surveyor came through the gate into the drainage easement strip. Cale showed them the outlet headwall and explained the situation. He had the notebook. He had the photograph of the 1961 district file. He had his 1-page calculation with Meridian's tile specs entered into Walter's formula. He laid it out without heat, without hurry, the way Walter had laid things out, not angry, not asking for anything, just showing the man what the numbers said and waiting for him to look at them. Stover listened. He took the notebook and looked at the calculation. He looked at the headwall. He looked at Cale's page. He put the page down on the top fence wire. He told Cale that Meridian's own engineers had modeled the drainage system, and the outlet was adequate for the planned installation. He said it without looking at the calculation again. Cale said the outlet was rated at 1. 4 CFs, and the proposed tile density would push 2. 1 in a wet April. Stover nodded the way a man nods when he has already made his decision, and the conversation is now a courtesy. He said they'd be fine. He got in the truck. The Meridian tile crew began work in December of 2021. Through January and February of 2022, a Case 8 drain plow pulled new adz tile across 3,000 acres in a grid that was visible from the county road and from the air, systematic, well-funded, exactly what it appeared to be. They finished in the second week of March, 3 weeks before planting. April of 2022 became the third wettest April on record in Hardin County. 2.5 inches fell in the first week of the month. 3 inches fell over the 48 hours of April 7th and 8th. The soil was already at field capacity when the second event hit, and the drainage systems across the county ran hard. On the Durbin farm, the tile drained fast and clear. The outlet on their south fence discharged steadily into the county ditch on schedule. On their north fence, the outlet structure that drained the Meridian property stopped moving water sometime in the early hours of April 8th. The tile backed up within 4 hours of the outlet failing. The soil on the north 1,800 acres of Meridian's property, the low ground, the section that drained through the longest tile run before reaching the outlet, began to saturate from below by afternoon. By the evening of April 9th, standing water covered 2,200 acres of planted corn. It stayed for 11 days. Corn can survive brief inundation in the early growth stages if the soil temperature and conditions are right. 11 days is not brief. The soil under the standing water in Hardin County in April runs cold, 48, 50 degrees, and corn seed in cold saturated soil does not germinate so much as it rots. You could walk the field margin when the water finally pulled back and see the rows where the seed had been placed, and see that nothing was coming up, and know that nothing was going to. The saturated soil prevented any field access for 10 additional days after the water receded. The replanting window for corn in central Iowa closes around May 10th. Meridian missed it on 2,200 acres. Their agronomic team projected a yield of 172 bushels per acre on those fields at a corn price of $4.90 per bushel. The loss came to approximately $1.86 million. Lyle Bauer drove past the Meridian fields on the morning of April 10th on his way to the co-op elevator in Iowa Falls. He saw the standing water, silver-gray across the low ground. The corn rows just visible at the edges where the planting had gotten ahead of the flooding. He did not stop. He drove to the co-op and then drove home and called Dan Durbin. He said, "Water standing north of you, all across their lower ground." Dan said he knew. Neither of them said anything after that, and then Lyle hung up. Meridian's regional operations manager called the Durbin farmhouse on April 14th, while the water was still on the fields. Dan answered. The operations manager said he was trying to understand the drainage situation and asked whether Dan had any thoughts. Dan said he didn't. He said to call Cale. There were 2 options for correcting the outlet problem, and Cale had written both of them down before the call came. Option 1. Replace the outlet structure on the Durbin drainage easement with a new headwall and pipe sized to 1 cubic feet per second, requiring access to the easement strip, an amended easement agreement, and construction cost of approximately $31,000. Option 2. Engineer and install a new drainage outlet on a different corridor that bypassed the Durbin property entirely, routing the water to the county ditch at a different point. at a cost of approximately $385,000 and an 18-month permitting and construction schedule. Meridian flew their regional director to Eldora in June of 2022. He sat across a table from Cale Durbin, who had Walter's notebook and his one-page calculation and a photocopy of the 1961 district file. The director was a composed man in his mid-50s, experienced in farmland negotiation across 6 states. He looked at the notebook when Cale put it on the table. He did not smile. Cale asked for 3 things: the $31,000 construction cost for the new outlet structure, an amended and recorded drainage easement agreement that formalized Meridian's obligation to the district outlet on Durbin property, and a cost-sharing arrangement for a new main tile line on the easement strip to handle future flow volumes. He did not ask for damages. He did not ask for an apology. Not vindictive about any of it, not difficult, just specific about what the land needed and what it would take, and nothing beyond that. Meridian agreed to all 3. A Caterpillar 320 excavator worked the drainage easement strip on the Durbin farm for 3 days in August of 2022. The new headwall went in on a Tuesday. The outlet was rated at 1 cubic feet per second, more than twice the capacity of what it replaced, sized for whatever tile density any upstream operator might eventually put in. The crew that did the work did not know the history. They did the job and moved to the next one. The following spring ran dry. The spring after that was average. The tile moved water at a rate the new outlet handled without strain. Lyle Bauer stopped at the Durbin farm in October of 2022 during cover crop seeding on no particular pretext. He found Cale in the shop. He stood there looking at something on the wall for a minute without saying anything. Then he said, "Your grandfather would have had that meeting in about 10 minutes. He said it once, plainly, with no particular inflection, and then he went to his truck. Cale Durbin is 21 now. He farms the 240 home acres alongside his father and holds 2 additional parcels on lease north of the home place, one of them on the boundary of the Meridian holdings. In the spring of 2023, Del Swartz from the Drainage District office called and said the board had a vacancy and that the Durbin name had been on it long enough that the absence was starting to feel like a gap that needed filling. Cale joined the board. He is the youngest member by 22 years. He attends every quarterly meeting. He reads what the engineering firms submit and then runs the numbers himself afterward in a notebook. He does not know yet whether the notebook will matter to anyone. Walter Durbin never wrote down why he had served on the board for 27 years. Cale asked him once, when he was 10 or 11, sitting on the tailgate of the truck at the north fence after they'd walked the easement strip in July. He asked why a person would want to go to a meeting about drainage ditches every 3 months for 27 years. Walter thought about it long enough that Cale figured he wasn't going to answer. Then he said he didn't know. Really, Saeed, the board needed people who understood the land, and somebody had to be one of them. The 5th notebook is on the shelf in the farmhouse office. Page 23. The flow calculation, the outlet capacity, the design assumption, and the margin note in pencil that a man wrote in 1961 and that his grandson found 60 years later on a Tuesday in October, in a drainage district records room in Eldora, in time. Just barely in time. Somebody had to write it down.